first meeting of our Affordable Housing Advisory Group. Thank you so much for your willingness to join this very, very important endeavor. I will facilitate tonight's meeting, and it is a virtual meeting. I'm sure many, if not all of you, have had a fair amount of experience attending and participating in these over the last year and a half or so. So as the facilitator, just run your questions and comments through me. You can raise your hand using the raise your hand feature. You can, raise your hand on your screen. I'll just do my very best to recognize you. But in order to minimize any feedback, we'll just keep ourselves muted when we're not speaking. So again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm here this evening with Todd Dumais, our town planner, and he and I will be attending probably most of your meetings. Very excited to get this group together. Hopefully everyone received a copy of the agenda that we sent out. If not, you can easily find it off of the town's website. But tonight's an introductory meeting. It's a chance for us to all get together and say hello and go around our virtual table, if you will. After we make introductions, we're then going to talk a little bit about our responsibilities and duties as they were set out by the town council. And then Todd is going to walk us through, just provide the highlights of some key data that we think will be informative to our work moving forward. Todd's going to talk about our housing data profile and touch on key sections of what's called our plan of conservation and development. Then we will talk about our meeting schedule and various meeting details, housekeeping, if you will. We'll provide 1 or 2 staff reports and talk about future agenda items. I am expecting we will be able to conclude this evening's meeting by 7:15, 7:30 or so. So hopefully that timetable works for all of you. If we do wrap up our business sooner than that, we can certainly end the meeting earlier. So again, thank you all for your interest and for submitting your names for consideration. I know the town council did authorize the establishment of this group some months back, but we had to do some groundwork first in order to get the committee established. So we're very pleased that we're all here and that we're able to begin our work. So I think it would be helpful if we were to go around our virtual meeting table, if you will, and make quick introductions. I will recognize you, and if you just want to provide your name and why you're interested in this work and what you're hoping to get out of this experience. Again, my name is Matt Hart. I'm West Hartford's town manager. I've been here in West Hartford. I'll start off. I've been here almost 4 years now, and I have about 27 years in the local government field. This is the 3rd Connecticut municipality that I have had the privilege of working for. I think this is a very salient and timely topic. The town of West Hartford, we are, I think, uniquely positioned to do some very good things with respect to promoting and advancing affordable housing. There is a lot of interest in the development community right now in various sorts of projects. Todd and I will touch on that tonight and in the meetings ahead. So again, very pleased that you're able to join us. That's a quick introduction from me. Todd, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you, Matt. Todd Dumais, town planner. I've been with the town of West Hartford for a little over 8 years. As a planner, I'm interested in many facets of land use, housing being one of them. And I'm very excited that we have such a talented group of people that are willing to volunteer their time on these important issues.
Thank you, Todd. And I'm just going to go alphabetically by first name down the list in our group of participants. Claudia, would you like to introduce yourself? Claudia Shelton. All right, Claudia, I think you have to hit your, you have to unmute yourself. All right, while we're waiting for Claudia, how about Elizabeth? Elizabeth Tavelli?
Hi, thanks. I'm a West Hartford resident, long time, about 15 years. So I have a lot of personal interest in the community, and I own and operate a real estate law firm in town, and I've been on the board of the West Hartford Land Trust since 2017. And so I'm really interested to learn from everyone, and West Hartford's booming. Our population is growing before our eyes. So I'm very interested and excited about what we might be able to accomplish.
That's great, Elizabeth. Thank you. Welcome. Is there a second Elizabeth on the line?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Sullivan. Sorry, my name tag is not coming up correctly. I've also been here about 15 years. I am the parent of a young man with disabilities, and myself and other members and parents of that community have been talking about the subject of affordable housing and accessible housing for a very long time. So I am excited that this group has formed, and I'm excited to be a part of creating something new and wonderful.
That's wonderful. That's great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Gail Weinstein.
Hi, I'm Gail Weinstein, and I'm a very long-time resident of West Hartford. I've been here for 52 years, and I spend part of my week in New York City, where I'm a property owner and a property manager, and I deal in the properties that we own, both in free market apartments and many affordable housing apartments, rent stabilized in New York. So I felt that I had some knowledge firsthand of what's affordable, and I thought this would be a very interesting group to be part of.
Thank you, Gail. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Greg Kirschner.
Hi, everybody. Greg Kirschner. I am a civil rights attorney. I've been practicing in Connecticut since about 2004 with a focus on fair housing rights. And I'm obviously interested in this topic and hope to bring a perspective that really focuses race and integration and the history of segregation that we need to address through this working group.
Thank you, Greg. Welcome. How about Casey Laflamme?
Hi, everyone. I'm Casey Laflamme. The other end of the spectrum, I'm a relatively new resident to West Hartford. I've been here for about a year now, really getting to know the community better. And for me, I've always been really interested in issues around affordable housing and community development. I do have a background in community planning, and I currently work for LISP, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, which is the nation's largest community development support organization, where we focus on issues around affordable housing, health and housing, just trying to make more equitable, sustainable places of opportunity here in Connecticut. So glad to be here and look forward to working with all of you.
Welcome, Casey. Great to have you. Next, Mr. Sullivan, Kevin.
Thank you, Matt. I will spare you the long bio. I will start by saying that I grew up here in the house my grandparents built in Elmwood. I have lived here most of the 72 years that I've been on this planet. Absolutely passionate about this community. I have, by training, I'm an attorney. My primary work has been in a variety of administrative functions. This will take me back to my days in the town council here and as mayor, when I was one of those people who actually enjoyed zoning and land use issues, which tends to be a bit of a rarity for folks on the town council. Full disclosure, I also serve on the board of the Partnership for Strong Communities, which is the primary advocacy group in Connecticut for housing opportunity, and I serve on the board of the Chrysalis Center, which is a entity which constructs, manages housing and supportive services. And I am very much looking forward to this opportunity. If we help the town do this right and have this conversation right in terms of messaging and context, I think there's great opportunities ahead.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciate your expertise and your experience. Kyle. Kyle, is it Shield? Am I pronouncing that right, Kyle?
You are correct. Hi, everyone. Kyle Scheel. I've lived in town since 2013. We love West Hartford, so we're happy to call this place home. My day job is with the town of Manchester. I'm in the Planning and Economic Development Department, and a lot of my work in that department relates to housing and land use. I serve on the I staff the Housing and Fair Rent Commission, and Manchester is a community that's been affordable for a while, and I've just been looking to apply some of my work skills to West Hartford, where I live. And I was involved in the very, very early stages of Desegregate Connecticut. And I just think it's at a pretty exciting time for Connecticut that there seems to be a different conversation going on. And people are willing to think about housing and land use issues a little differently. So I'm looking forward to working with you folks on this committee.
That's great. Thank you, Kyle. And I have a lot of respect for the town of Manchester as an organization. You'll do a lot of excellent work there.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mark. And is it Grilly? Mark?
Yes, that's right. Hi, Matt. Hi, everyone. Just quickly, I've been in combined 25 years experience in construction and affordable housing, both on the construction side, but on the provider side, particularly in the senior living arena. I've been previous West Hartford resident, lived in West Hartford for about 15 years. My parents grew up here, so I currently work here at West Hartford Fellowship Housing, represent about 230 residents, affordable senior residents, and those with disabilities. So I'm excited to sort of bring my experience to the table, share what I've learned over the years. Looking forward to collaborating and learning from all of you and identifying what the future for affordable housing could be in here in West Hartford. So thank you so much for having me.
Welcome, Mark. Thank you for signing on. Matt Lyman.
Good evening, everyone. So Matt Lyman, Senior Vice President of Lending at Northwest Community Bank. We're a 165-year-old institution helping our community. I've been a West Hartford resident since 2011. I have 5 children that are 6 years of age and younger. So deep-rooted as it relates to the education side of things here in West Hartford and how great of a town we have. Also have been a landlord the last 3 or 4 years, so know the affordable housing situation in West Hartford. Also a strong background in Connecticut Housing Finance Authority and the great programs that they offer for financing for first-time home buyers. So just excited to be part of this group and look forward to using my expertise the best ways possible.
Welcome, Matt. Thank you. And next we have Matthew, or do you prefer Matt Brockman?
Either one's fine. Matt Brockman, I work up at the state capitol for the majority leader. I live over on Stowe Road. One of the things I'm excited to be sort of part of this group, done work and research on affordable housing issues from a sort of state policy perspective. So excited to be part of this conversation to help be part of how to deal with it locally.
Welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for joining the team here. Next, we have Michael D'Amato.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Mike D'Amato. Like a couple of other people here, my background is in planning and community development. I've lived here for about 7, almost 8 years, and I own and operate a small planning consulting firm here in Connecticut, and have worked a lot with municipalities on developing affordable housing plans and have a lot in progress right now. locally or specific to West Hartford. I'm interested in learning more about what our housing attainability really is. Are we an attainable community? Are we not? What's the data show? And I think it's important to kind of figure that out because it's one of the biggest components, I think, to our success long term, and maybe working to dispel the rumor that West Hartford maybe isn't a community in the future that is so out of reach for the people that want to be residents here.
Welcome, Michael. Thank you for joining us. Next, we have Nadia.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Nadia Kechwaha. I am a realtor with Coldwell Banker. I've been in West Hartford for about 7 years now. Been in real estate for over 17. I am a landlord myself in the area, and I know, being in this space for so long, the racism and discrimination that exists within this space. And I've been involved this year in West Hartford with some of the curriculum groups with the high school, and understand that as a community, we really need to stand up and help diversify and make sure that we are serving our community. And that's my interest in being in this group, is to use my expertise in real estate to do something for our town. So I'm excited to be here.
Thank you very much, Nadia. It's great to have you. And next, I should have caught this earlier. We do not have Phyllis Hyman, but instead we have David Fink. David, we'll have to get you to switch up your moniker there. David, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Can you hear me? I'm happy to be here. I have been a West Hartford resident for 37 years. I was a newspaperman for 27 years, 16 of them at the Current. I then became the policy director at the Partnership for Strong Communities, which is the principal statewide housing advocacy organization in the state. I really have gotten excited about the fact that Mayor Cantor and Matt and Todd have wanted to create this advisory group. I've worked with a number of towns that have had housing committees of residents, and it's worked out very well for them. And I think we'll be able to understand not only the town's housing situation and its housing needs, but also help communicate that to other residents and educate them. So I look forward to serving.
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate your advocacy to help us get going here. Next, we have Renee. Renee Lopez.
Hi, my name is Renee Lopez, and I'm a Cuban immigrant. When we got to this country, we had absolutely nothing. So affordable housing is something that, looking back, is very important to me. Been living in West Hartford in the same house for over 40 years, and really like West Hartford as a whole. I have been on the board for affordable housing in the Bishop's Corner area, referred to as Fellowship, and I've been working with Mark, who's been very helpful to us. I am a retired insurance executive, and so anyway, my whole interest in this is from a personal perspective in terms of helping people who are in the same position that I was in with my family a while ago.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you for joining us. And someone I must have missed earlier, Bill Linton. Welcome, Bill.
Hi, thank you. Well, you didn't miss me, but I signed in a bit late, so you probably skipped over my name when I wasn't there. Bill Linton. I've got 35 years of architectural experience as an architectural designer. A good bit of that early on. I worked down in Middletown for a company a small company. We did a lot of work for state housing projects and that sort of thing. In the intervening years, I've traveled around the globe and worked internationally, but have returned to West Hartford in the last couple of years. My affiliation is lifelong. really because West Hartford was my grandparents' home, and so I've been coming to West Hartford since before I was born. And at different times through the years, West Hartford has been my residence, if only temporarily. But now I'm here, settled in, and trying to develop my own small consultancy, but also doing a lot of work taking care of my 87-year-old mom who's living in a retirement community up in Bloomfield, and putting a lot of time in taking care of her.
Welcome, Bill. It's great to have you with us. Next, my old colleague, Bob Sikowski. Welcome, Bob.
Thanks, Matt. Hello, everybody. My name is Bob Sitkowski, and my day job, I'm the Associate Director for Real Estate at UConn, and I'm a member of the faculty of the Department of Public Policy, like Matt, as an adjunct, where I teach a course on urban planning. I'm a 20-year resident of West Hartford, and I'm a longstanding member of First Church in the Center, which is a member of an organization in the region called the Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance. And this organization has a housing team, which is working on affordable housing advocacy. Since 1985, I've worked in and have education in architecture, urban design, urban planning, and law. And prior to joining UConn, I was with a large Connecticut law firm doing land use law, representing municipalities, developers, landowners, neighbors, interest groups. And I'm looking forward to using those skills as a complement to everything I've heard here tonight. I'm very excited to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. It's wonderful to have you as well. All right, and then we have two Trishas. We'll start off with Trisha Haggerty.
Hi, my name is Trisha Haggerty Wenz. Currently, I've been a resident of West Hartford for a little more than 10 years now, and currently work at Real Artways located in Parkville. I'm the Director of Development there. Prior to that, I was the Executive Director of a nonprofit in New York where we developed and managed affordable housing, particularly on adaptive reuse of historic buildings. And I was able to see firsthand the benefits of these projects, not only for the individuals who lived in them, but for the community as well. So I'm excited to meet all of you and to learn from all of you and work on this project together. So thank you for having me.
Welcome, Trisha. It's wonderful to have you too. And then Trisha Pitter. Trisha.
Yes, hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Trisha Pitter. I've been a resident of West Hartford for about 6 years. I moved from the north end of Hartford, where I was born and raised most of my life. So this is my community. I have a 10-year-old daughter. I've been very active in the work of education equity, working with a West Hartford district parent group, as well as my daughter's elementary school. I also work for the UConn Health Disparities Institute, and my interest being here is looking at affordable housing in the intersection of overall health through an equity lens. Also looking at the structures and systems that are in place, the practices and the policies that exist to exacerbate the inequities that do exist within our West Hartford community. So making sure that we're centering our residents' interest and making affordable housing a possibility and looking at it through an equity lens, especially as we look at public health issues.
Thank you so much, Trisha. It's great to have your experience. So who might I have missed?
Me.
Who hasn't had a chance to introduce themselves?
Me,
Anyone?
Claudia.
Yes, Claudia.
Well, I'm fascinated to hear the experiences of all the people who have spoke before. I'm really humbled by it. I have a little different background. I've been involved in community organizations and community management, and I'll tell you 4 of the places where I was involved. I was born and raised in New York, And I was working there at Chase Manhattan when the Travelers got me to be their first woman vice president out of 30,000 people. I didn't know that when I joined, but it was a very interesting experience. I was also the head of counseling at Renbrook School, which is a school for kindergarten through 9. And I was very involved in the children who had problems. And at that time, I was teaching social and emotional learning at Columbia University in New York. I also was a participant in the mentoring program for a group of prisoners that Asnatuck Community College was sponsoring. And they wanted to be mechanics in a program that would give them $50,000 a year in salary. It was a very, very interesting experience. And finally, I was, I guess that was all the things that I wanted to talk about, but I hope that I bring to the group a series of sociological questions that will complement all of your deep experience in this matter, and I'm very excited to be a part of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claudia, and welcome. Anyone else I might have missed? I don't think so. Well, wow, what a talented group. What a great group. See, we've got Kevin. Oh, Kevin, you're muted.
Could we get, before the next time we gather, a list with preferred contact for everybody that's here?
Yeah, we will do that. We will do that. Thank you for that. Thank you for that reminder, Kevin. And we do have a few additional folks, one or two, I think, who weren't able to join us this evening for whatever reason. But what a great and talented group with a diverse set of experiences that I think will all be relevant to our work. So why don't we move on then to the next item on our agenda, and let's talk a little bit about why we are here. So I will start off, and then I'll ask Todd to elaborate on anything I might have missed. And folks will recall, that council authorized us to establish this group back at the end of February of this year, so some months ago. And the key reasons for the formation of this group, number one, you are probably all aware that the state has asked all municipalities to prepare what's called an affordable housing plan. And we do need to submit that roughly a year from now in July of 2022. And that's going to be a significant project for us. And we thought it would be important to involve a cross-section of our community to advise and help us put that plan together. So that, that requirement certainly was an impetus to putting this group together. But then secondly, and perhaps more importantly, our own plan of conservation and development. And if you're not familiar with a plan of conservation and development, the acronym is a POCD. We're going to reference that a lot in our meetings. You're going to hear that acronym, POCD. That is a statutorily required plan. It's primarily a land use plan that every municipality in the state needs to publish every 10 years. It's developed by the Planning Commission with input from other segments of the municipal organization. It's primarily a land use plan, but it does touch on other municipal operations and other things important to the municipal government. And our most recently adopted plan of conservation and development does have a number of key goals and objectives that relate to the promotion of affordable housing. So those were kind of the two main reasons why the council thought it would be appropriate to establish a group such as this. So this is an ad hoc group. We do need to comply with what's called the Freedom of Information Act, and I will talk about that a little bit later on in our meeting today. And so in terms of we're an ad hoc group formed for this purpose. You know, we're gonna meet until we develop that affordable housing plan and accomplish a few other key tasks as well. You know, this group could lead to the establishment of a more permanent body that is created and established to work on those issues. So some of the tasks we think this committee, this advisory group would be helpful with would be conducting a townwide housing needs assessment. That is going to be an important part of our development of that affordable housing plan. Another component where we think you could be helpful is helping us to take a look at the zoning ordinances we currently have in place. And we have had, we were one of the first municipalities in the state to adopt zoning. We've got a long history of zoning, and some ordinances have been revised. Many have been revised over the decades. Some arguably could use further revision. Another task where we think you could be helpful is helping us to support the efforts of various nonprofit groups and for-profit developers as well to expand what we call housing choice options in our community. So let me pause there and turn to Todd. And Todd, if you want to elaborate a little bit further, maybe something I might have missed in terms of why the council and why we as a staff thought it would be very useful to create this body.
I don't think you missed anything, Matt. We'll get into a little bit deeper dive discussion about the POCD and circle upon that, but I think there's a lot of elements when we get into that part of our discussion that can be informative to our overall process. But I think you hit the high level reasons where we thought that this group would really be helpful for the community.
All right, thank you, Todd. So just pulling up our agenda again. Can I take any quick questions on what I just reviewed? Todd's going to take a further dive in a moment or two on our plan of conservation and development, but any quick questions regarding the council resolution that established this group? All right, not hearing or seeing any, why don't we move forward? And we did provide a couple of links to some documents that we thought would be useful for your meetings. Not so much tonight, but in future meetings. One of them is the housing data profile. So I will ask Todd to walk us through the highlights of that. You know, one, what is it? And what are the key data for West Hartford? Todd.
Thank you, Matt. So the two links, one of them was to the Partnership for Strong Communities. I guess, thank you, Mr. Fink and Mr. Sullivan, for your organization's excellent resource. And it's a good resource that pulls together basic demographic information about communities throughout the state of Connecticut, both demographic and with a really strong look at housing. By show of hands, would it be helpful for our next meeting if we provided printed materials? I know not everyone prefers to review information digitally. We could print off copies of the housing data profile and relevant sections of our plan of conservation and development. Would that be helpful to have a paper copy of those documents?
Yes, I think so.
Just raise your hand, shake your head, give me some sort of, no, not getting much feedback. Okay.
I mean, if you circulate them, we can always print them, right?
Correct. So I'm going to share my screen right now and bring up the housing data profile and just touch upon some of the high level information contained there to see if some of the data captured matches your perception of West Hartford. So everyone should be able to see my screen now with a bunch of blue pie charts.
Yep, we've got it.
Great, thanks, Matt. So first and foremost, West Hartford is approximately a little over 2/3 single-family housing stock. So all of our housing, we have a little over 26,000 units of housing, of which about 2/3 is single-family housing. And what's really helpful about the Partnership for Strong Communities data profiles, and even more so, and we'll send out links to this information, they now have an interactive comparison tool whereby you can select any community in the state and compare it to multiple other communities, county level information, or state level information. So this is the PDF kind of static version of that profile that we're looking at. And you can see that we have a higher percentage than both Hartford County in the state of Connecticut as a single family makeup of our housing stock. We also have a much older housing stock than either the county or the state of Connecticut. And you can see that about 42% of our housing stock in West Hartford was constructed before 1950, and about 80% was constructed prior to 1970s, which is a much higher percentage than both the county and at the state level. We'll talk a little bit further, and hopefully we get into a deep dive. Mike D'Amato, I'm glad you kind of raised a very interesting point is, what is our true housing attainability level? What does it mean? So we're going to hear and use the terms affordable housing, and I've always liked to use the terms big A and little a affordable. So the big A affordable is this number here, which is 8%. So the Department of Housing calculates a percentage of affordable units for every municipality, and something that goes into essentially an affordable housing appeals list. And our current calculated rate for affordable housing, that's any housing that receives a type of qualifying government subsidy, is around 8% of our housing stock, a little over 2,000 units. That same law requires every municipality to try to achieve 10% affordable stock, or otherwise we're subject to an affordable house appeal list process and development. We'll talk about that. So perhaps more little a affordable. Now this is very useful information. It takes a look at the housing cost burden for both renters and owners in West Hartford. And what you can see in this information here is that, for the most part, our renters are more significantly burdened by the cost of housing than our homeowners, generally speaking. And you can see about almost 50% of renters are burdened by the cost of housing. And that burden is anyone that's exceeding 30% of their income on housing. So we'll be interested to see, we probably won't see any census data come out by the time we're done in this working group, but it'll be interesting to see what the census data for the 2020 census reveals. Both, I think I heard someone say West Hartford is booming and growing. The data doesn't bear that out based on past population projections. We have been relatively flat with population since at least 2010. And possibly even had a slight decline preceding that. So it will be interesting to see, what our population number does do. But as of the 2010 census, we were about 63,000 people. About 27% of our population are persons of color, and we have a median age of about 40. Again, this number on the bottom, I don't know that I necessarily agree with the Connecticut Data Center that we're projected to have an 11.3% population change in the next 20 years, but maybe we will. So I'm going to pause there and take any questions that anyone might have on kind of housing, Partnership for Strong Communities housing data profile.
How many of Can you hear me?
Yes, who is that?
Yes. How much of the housing is occupied by renters?
Thank you, Claudia. Todd, do you have that answer? Andy?
I do. Give me 1 second, Claudia.
Okay.
So according to this number, so if we look at our single family occupancy level, give me a second. So it's about 2/3, a little over 2/3 of all our housing is owner occupied. So the balance being, renters occupying the housing types. And that varies across both categories of obviously single family housing and multifamily. That's a total, roughly or approximately 2/3 owner occupied, the rest occupied by renters of all unit types.
So that would mean a third, roughly, of the housing is occupied by renters?
A little bit less than a third, but that's close.
Okay.
Obviously, the percentage is higher for multifamily dwellings in terms of renter occupancy and lower for single family housing type.
So Todd?
Oh, I think I saw Kevin's hand and
Just
then Renee.
Todd's
Kevin?
comment about population, I think you're right, and it's important, I think, to look a little backward. We were at and almost below the 50,000 point at one point in time. So I think the sense of growth is for folks who have been here a relatively shorter time. There has been dramatic growth from our low point of maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago in terms of population. And as I read the data you shared, there seems to be kind of a barbell population, a rapidly aging population, probably in rapidly aging stock, and then a rapidly growing younger population, and which sort of suggests some interesting things about what's going to happen demographically over the next 20 years.
Todd, any comments on that? Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin, it's exactly right. I actually think our high was, if it wasn't at 70, it might have been just over 70,000 back in the early 70s. And that was sort of reflective of that baby boom generation. If we look at the census numbers from back then, we'll see that the average household size was much larger than it is today. Today in West Hartford, our average household size is about 2 people per household. So I think Kevin's also right. And if we look at that, the underlying demographics of the data, we do have a higher percentage of our population that's aging, let's say 60 and over. But then we have a very large percentage of our population in the younger cohorts and an increasingly large percentage in our 20-somethings. So our 20-year-olds, we have a larger population there. So that both of those things should have an impact on policy decisions and creation of housing types when we examine kind of the profiles of both population groups.
Thank you, Todd. Any follow-up to that, Kevin?
No, thank you.
Okay, then I think Renee had his hand up, followed by Gail, followed by Tricia. Renee?
Thanks. I just need clarification. At one point, my parents were living in a 3-family home on one of the floors. Let us say that the owner was living on one of those floors. Would that 3-family house be identified as being occupied by the owner, or would 2/3 of it be identified as being a renter type of property? Thank you.
Assuming that all 3 units were captured and identified as 3 separate living units, then it would be 1 unit owner occupied, and then the other 2 would be renter occupied. That's how the data should be captured. I can't say that always happens, largely based on census data and in surveys, ACS survey information. But in that example, it should be 1/3 owner occupied and then the other 2 units renter occupied.
Thank you, Todd. Any follow-up on that, Renee?
It just seems, that because I live in the vicinity of Elmwood and Park Road and, the Hartford, West Hartford line, a lot of that housing stock is 3-family homes. And it doesn't seem like the data is capturing each one of those floors or units as a separate unit, given, my own personal experience.
That's Renee, that's a very interesting observation. One of the things I think is somewhat misleading about West Hartford is a lot of the areas you identify are on major arterial roadways, right? So they carry higher volumes of traffic, and when people come in and out of West Hartford, they might come through Farmington Avenue, South Main Street, New Britain Avenue, Park Road perhaps, or Prospect Avenue. And a lot of those housing types we see there are multifamily housing or 3-family or more. So there's a somewhat misleading perception that we have a lot more of that housing type than we actually do. I can bring up another, I'll attempt to bring up another chart that shows that. This is, sorry, bear with me. I'll get in a second. I'm having trouble loading that screen. I'll also touch upon it in our plan of conservation and development discussion, but I think since we talked about it right now, one of the things I can show you, I can get my share screen to work. So Matt, do we see a nice Tudor looking colonial?
Yes.
Okay. So this is an excerpt from our housing and neighborhoods and housing section of our plan of conservation development. It's a breakdown of our housing stock. This was from local assessors information. It's a little bit different than our Partnership for Strong Communities information. But here in this chart, as of 2018, when we prepared the plan, it was about 63% single family stock, 7% 2-family, 4% 3-family. Condominiums are oftentimes captured as single family housing, depending on how they're created. The map here is what I wanted to show everyone. And it's a little bit difficult to read, but the corridors I discussed are largely the areas that have the darker blue or the purple, which are more densely concentrated multifamily housing types, with the single family areas kind of being tucked back. So I often explain it as there's sort of a perception, depending on how you're moving through West Hartford, that there may appear to be more 3 and 4-family housing or 2-family housing than we actually have in raw numbers. That being said, we still have thousands of units of both of those housing types. And if you compare our numbers for 3 and 4-family and 2-family, you'll see that we compare relatively favorably well to other places in Connecticut as having more of that housing type.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you for raising that, Renee. Why don't we go next to Gail, and then Trisha P, and then Casey.
Yeah, I'd just like to indicate for the older population in West Hartford, many of them are leaving or have left and have moved to Florida, as have many people in the state. So I think we should think about that too, because as they leave, it frees up more housing opportunities for younger families.
Thank you, Gail.
You're welcome.
Trisha.
Yeah, my question is looking at the data for people of color. I just wanted to know, well, 2 things. Number one, is there anything out there that disaggregates this data, like looks at subgroups? So that's one question. The second question is, has the percentage of people of color, has it gone up or gone down when you're comparing year-to-year trends?
So Tricia, for that last question, are you talking about home ownership or as a percentage of population?
Percentage of population.
Okay.
And home ownership, actually both. That would be
Okay.
great.
Todd, do you have that handy?
Part of the answer, Handy. I am not a demographer, so I can only see what I see in the census data. So the only truly accurate data we have are the every 10-year census reports, which captures at a statistically valid snapshot. Historically, West Hartford and the state as a whole is becoming increasingly diverse. Our current numbers, the breakdown when the 2020 census data eventually is released at the local community level, we'll get a better picture of what our diversity actually looks like. The breakdown, the number that I gave before, about 27% people of color, it's broken out in this Partnership for Strong Communities report as approximately 8% people of Asian heritage, 6% Black or African American, 11% Hispanic and Latino, 2% other or multiracial, and then the balance being approximately 73% white. Oftentimes, those numbers float around depending on how people of Hispanic or Latino origins are classified, because the census data often allows them to be classified under numerous population groups, depending on how those folks identify. So I think the long-term trend is there is a increasing diversity both in West Hartford, the county, and the state as a whole. I don't have the numbers, so we could pull those for next time and look at those if we go back to 2010, 2000, and see what the number actual change has been.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Tricia. So we'll follow up with more of that data.
I don't have the housing information, the other part of that question. That's something we'd have to dig into and see if we can obtain.
Yeah, maybe some of our experts in the group here might know. Any follow-up on that, Tricia?
Nope, just looking forward to that data.
Okay. Let's go to, I think, Casey. Did Casey have her hand up?
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up on Renee's point around multifamily housing and looking at it not just from the perspective of units, but by structure, and as an opportunity to look at preserving community ownership. That for many individuals, multifamily housing can be a great way for affordable home ownership. And so as we, look to develop this plan in town, take a look at the local ownership of those units and whether or not there might be something there to consider.
Thank you, Casey. Good point. Elizabeth Sullivan.
I just want to go back to what we were talking about. I don't know about housing, but if you want a more current idea, I know Conard High School, where one of my children goes, prides itself on the fact that its racial makeup exactly mirrors that of the United States. We just recently moved to the school, so that was one of the things. And again, that's not definitive of all the residents in town, but if you're looking at a trend, that is certainly an indicator of the families with school-age population.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
I have something to add.
Thanks, Tricia.
When looking at West Hartford, I see that, and I do agree with you, what you're saying, and I see in it, and what I see is that there's if you want to use the word diverse population, that's basically kind of segregated in a particular area of West Hartford, right? You find that population there, but where I live, you don't see that, right? And the contrast in those two is why is there more concentrated population there on the other end of West Hartford and it isn't here? So looking forward to anybody who can answer that question.
It isn't it fair to say, I mean, based on living here this long, that there is pretty clear correlation between affordability and demography, right? So that on the east side of town, a large population, ex-Hartford population primarily, was able during a period of growth to have the opportunity to become homeowners. Those houses were affordable, relatively speaking. The Elmwood area is a place of affordable housing, relatively speaking. So the overall picture is one of an amazing change in this community in terms of diversity, but there are still issues of concentration.
Yeah, thank you, Tricia. Thank you, Kevin. You know, I think that's one of the reasons why we've been put together, right? We want to dig into that and try to better understand it, and see what type of strategies we can recommend and pursue for positive change. Let me turn. I think Renee had his hand up, followed by Greg, and then Todd. Todd, did you want to weigh in before I move back to Renee?
I just wanted to make sure you saw both of their hands and just remind everyone that some of the current demographic makeup is largely a result of some historic, redlining or restrictive covenants that have been put in place decades ago. Some of those, you can still search land records and find restrictive covenants that didn't allow people of color or certain religions in the Jewish community to purchase into neighborhoods. And we have excellent local historians that have kind of documented this issue. And part of that, you could argue, is reflective of kind of our concentration of our demographic makeup today. I think a strong argument can be made for that, and I'd be interested to hear Greg or Renee's take on that. Greg, particularly Greg, since I think he's got a background in this field.
Well, thank you, Todd. So why don't we turn to Renee and then to Greg?
When I used to live just about in Patrici's backyard, for those of us who remember where Patrici's was, that was pretty much a reflective of the entire world, including a lot of Vietnamese immigrants, etc. As we moved into this newer neighborhood, this area seems to be more defined by religious restrictions in terms of the number of the distance you can be from a particular synagogue. And, so that is based on religion, but it's relative to distance. And so there is a greater concentration of that particular sect, if you would, within that religion in this area, because of the need for them to be able to walk to church. West Hartford has a gift in terms of being half Jewish and half Christian and other denominations. So we're very well connected or reflected as far as diversity in that particular situation. But because of that walking distance restriction, there is more concentration in given spots than others.
Yeah, thank you, Renee. Certainly, those historic factors, contributed to our settlement patterns. Greg.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack in the demographic history and location of housing in West Hartford. Perhaps you're going to get to it later, but when you pointed to the POCD, I thought that another interesting map was on page 24, which showed that 3% of the land in West Hartford is occupied by multifamily housing. So we may think about these concentrations of multifamily housing. It may seem like we have more multifamily housing stock, but in reality, it's really a tiny, tiny part of the land mass of West Hartford. And that's obviously going to have an impact on diversity, both economic and racial, and on development possibilities that might be able to be implemented in order for us to address some of these imbalances that our town faces. Speaking of what Todd talked about, I can't recommend highly enough The Color of Law, which is a book by a gentleman named Richard Rothstein, which goes into all of the legal bases and government mandated segregation that has really shaped how all of our communities exist to today. There's also very much more local analysis on this. A West Hartford resident at Trinity College professor has done a dive into zoning and ramifications on zoning and where people live in the greater Hartford region. And I believe that's available through the Trinity College website as an ebook. And then just a last point I'll make very, very quickly, when we talk about the racial demographics and the diversity of West Hartford, I think that there is an element of there being some level of diversity in West Hartford. But we need to be careful when we look at statewide data or national data or other measures. We have to remember that we're a town of 63,000 people, and our African-American population is 6%. We're located next to a city of 120,000 people where the African-American population is over 30%. So it's not enough to hold ourselves to a measure against a larger geographic area when there's clearly a dividing line that happens along the border between Hartford and West Hartford. And that's, has deep historic roots. And, the same can be said of Latinx populations, 11% in West Hartford, over a third in Hartford. So there clearly are dividing lines, and there's a lot of history that goes behind how that all happened. And I think I would submit that perhaps the restrictions on where and how much multifamily housing can be developed is a current impediment to addressing some of those historic barriers that have resulted in these demographics. And like to think that that's something we'd be very focused on in these discussions.
Thank you, Greg. And if you want to provide any of those resources or share any of those resources via the chat feature, feel free. Thank you for that. So why don't we move, I'm going to suggest we move forward to the next item on our agenda. And Todd has already touched on it a little, but Todd, could you highlight some of the key sections of the plan just a little bit further for tonight?
Sure. And just so I want to make sure everyone is aware, I know we have a couple of planners and other folks that are familiar with the plan of conservation and development. Matt touched on it earlier in the evening, but it's a requirement under the state statutes that a community every 10 years has to adopt an update to their plan of conservation and development. If you don't, then a municipality is ineligible for discretionary state funding. Now, the POCD is really supposed to serve as a guiding document for a community's growth. It really needs to establish a vision statement and strategies to achieve that vision. It also affords community the opportunity to create community buy-in and ownership of policies and ideas contained within the plan. It should represent a wide range of stakeholders of a community. And really, it's, as Matt talked about, it's primarily a land use document that's a comprehensive planning strategy for the next 10 years of a community, and it should lead and direct capital improvements within the community as well. Most typically, a plan of conservation development will focus on certain thematical areas: open space, the environment, economic development, housing, transportation. I think what I'd like to focus on this evening is just an overview of our current plan of conservation and development. As Matt mentioned, was adopted by our town council and prepared by our town planning and zoning commission with significant community input last summer, early summer in May. And the plan differs from prior plans in a couple of critical ways. I think there was a really robust community engagement through a variety of mechanisms and tools we used. And share my screen one more time. everyone can see this guiding lens screen. So we see 4 colored circles. Matt, can we see that? I just want to make sure.
Yep, looks good.
It's always tricky having multiple screens and then sharing them on this platform. So one of the things that separates this plan out from our prior plans is early on in our process, really we saw 4 common themes vary across all the feedback and the data we heard from the community. And through those themes, our planning commission ultimately called them guiding lenses. And it was their intent that each of these guiding lenses, one on sustainability, one on innovation, one on connectivity, and one on equity. And the equity one I think is important and should be informative to everything we do in this group. And that says West Hartford will continue to respect the inherent value of each member of its community and in each area of town by eliminating structural and institutional inequities that impede any sector of our community from reaching its full potential. Now, these guiding lenses were meant to inform the process of creating the vision of our plan, which is, West Hartford strives to be a welcoming, innovative, livable, and prosperous community with unique diversity across economic, religious, social, and cultural spectrums. We seek to maintain and promote our thriving community by providing equitable access to a variety of options of housing, employment, transportation, education, and other amenities in a manner that reflects responsible stewardship of the environment, socio-cultural, and economic resources necessary for a vibrant quality of life. Obviously, that's a lot to pack into a vision, but it was the attempt to hear everything that we heard from the community and create a vision statement that could guide the whole document. Underneath that, our plan is divided into these 7 thematical areas, one on facilities and infrastructure, one on transportation, one on cultural and historic resources, one on open space and the environment, plan section on economic development, neighborhoods and housing, and then land use. The neighborhoods and housing goal of the plans says to enhance and maintain West Hartford's existing neighborhoods and encourage diversity of housing types and cost to provide access and availability of housing options to current and future residents. It may not seem like a lot, but I'd be interested to hear from other planners. The fact that we actually pointed to future residents is often something that many communities have trouble doing. Some communities think that the plan is there to serve its current residents and really kind of not with an eye towards future residents. Keep in mind, I think I heard in our introductions that while some of you certainly grew up in West Hartford, many of you moved here from elsewhere. So we always need to be mindful of our housing stock, our neighborhoods, and how we can attract future residents and provide for those range of housing types and costs to attract as many different people as we can. Within the document, so chapter 3 is the section, I hope everyone gets a review. Our goal was vetted through those 4 lenses. We looked at our regional housing goals and found something that we thought was consistent with both regional goals of CROG and our state growth management principle. And as Matt touched on earlier, there are a couple actionable items within the plan that are divided into a few strategies and a few action items that we think that this group might be able to help us get a better handle on, such as conducting a townwide housing needs assessment, reviewing some of our zoning ordinances around housing, multifamily housing, single family housing. I would like to call out and point out one of them we just completed. And in our plan of conservation development, it talks about looking at our single family zoning and creating opportunities for accessory dwelling units. Our town council did adopt an accessory dwelling unit ordinance in January that is much more permissive than what we historically allowed for. Now, any property, any single family property is eligible for an accessory dwelling unit with minimal limitations on what is controlled in that process. It's as of right by a site plan, and it largely mimics some of the state legislation that just passed, actually requiring communities to allow for accessory dwelling units. We're going to have to make 1 or 2 small tweaks, but I'm glad to see that West Hartford's example is very consistent with the recently adopted state level mandate. So I don't want to go into too much detail on this section of the plan. I just wanted to provide a high-level overview and use that as a framework for our future discussions around all of these important issues and topics around housing. Pause there and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Todd. And before we get to questions regarding the POCD, I missed David earlier. I think David either had a question or a point he wanted to raise regarding the earlier discussion. David?
Thank you, Matt. I just wanted to underscore a couple of things that Greg said and Todd pointed out about the housing data profile. I mean, the fact is, I mean, what Greg pointed out is true, that there just is not the diversity in town that there could be, and there are not as many affordable units in town as there could be. When people look at the housing data profile when it's sent around, the important number is something that Todd did point out, which is the number of people who are burdened by their housing costs. And I think there are about 45% of the renters and about 20 or 25% of the homeowners that are paying more than 30% of their income on housing. And so what that means is that they have little left over for other necessities, food, clothing, transportation, healthcare, childcare. That's bad for them. It's also bad for the merchants in town because they don't have much disposable income. So that's important to remember. The other thing that I hope, Matt, you and Todd can send around is the ALICE study that's done by the United Way of Connecticut. ALICE stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. What it takes a look at essentially is the number of people in every town in the state that are making what they call the survival budget. In other words, enough money to pay for all their necessities. The really, really important number to look at in West Hartford is that 24% of the households, 1/4 of them, are ALICE households. In other words, they don't make the survival budget, which is about $26,000 for individuals and about $80,000 for a household of 4. So what we're talking about there are what some people have called the working poor. Those are people who are just making it and just able to pay for everything until the carburetor goes or the water heater goes or there's some other unexplained expense or their hours get cut. And to understand that 1/4 of the households in West Hartford are ALICE households is very important. Those people need homes that are more affordable. So that, I think, is a subject that we are going to have to focus upon.
Yeah, thank you, David, and thank you for raising the ALICE report. You know, we have started to use that as an organization more frequently over the last couple of years. Very valuable resource. Okay, let us now move on to some questions regarding just the highlights from the POCD. I see Kevin Sullivan, Kevin, and then Renee.
Todd, I think that there's a pull quote somewhere in the document that you've just talked about, and at some point, not tonight and not soon, you probably want to talk about how to talk about these issues. The pull quote is, "I think West Hartford should continue to grow and change, but incrementally." And there's also a great deal of messaging, I think, in that plan, that we need to acknowledge the strength of what we have while trying to do and change toward what we don't have. And this group is going to be very candid internally about those conversations, I hope. But I'm putting a marker down that it's probably because I've sort of have been I'm reading a book about housing initiatives during the Great Society, which is ancient history, I realize. But the degree to which there was a rhetoric around that, which led to an incredible backlash, which defeated a whole lot of really great ideas. So I think one of the other things we need to talk about at some point in time, as I do believe that the town plan does well, is sort of talk about how to talk about this, and how it becomes not a zero sum, but a win-win.
Excellent point, Kevin. So that, yeah, that is certainly something, you know, I think for this group, we're going to need to be open and free and wide ranging in our discussions to take this on.
We once had a superintendent of schools. I loved his one of his comments was that change happens in West Hartford in direct disproportion to our awareness of it. And that may no longer be true of this community, because I think this community has changed in ways that are probably more embracing of change than we once were. But it is still a good caution that in context and message for these discussions can make a great deal of difference between success and failure.
Thank you. Renee, did you have a question or comment regarding the plan?
I have a comment and a question. The comment is we also need to consider those folks who are aging in their housing and are becoming economically uncertain, as you know, the cost of repairs and other things come in and hit on a fixed income. But the question is, you know, we're talking about a lot about the existing structures, and I know that the town was very helpful in terms of moving that, I think it was a convent on One Park Road into housing units. And I know that the area around Patrici's has been changed into apartment units, but there's not a lot of empty space in West Hartford to build on. So are there other areas where we are converting land into multiple unit housing? Question.
Thank you, Renee. So to your point, I'm going to turn to Todd in a second. To your point, we are what's called a fully built out community, where there is not a lot of green space that is available for primary development. What we are looking at here in West Hartford primarily are redevelopment opportunities. You also talked about the importance of housing for people that are aging. And yes, that is part of our charge as well. You know, the plan talks about promoting the availability and development of a range of housing types and affordabilities to meet the diverse needs, all age groups of the community. Todd, do you want to elaborate on my response to Renee?
I would only add, Renee, there, yes, I think, you know, we are generally perceived to be a fully built out community. I think, I'm trying to remember who it was. Perhaps it was you, Greg, that referenced a chart we have in the plan that talks about, you know, if you look at multifamily as a category of land use, it comprises or uses about 3% of all the land in West Hartford. What that doesn't capture, we allow multifamily housing in our retail and almost all of our retail and commercial districts, and more recently our industrial districts. So when you factor those in, you know, we allow multifamily and have multifamily dwellings in all of those districts, many of those districts. So I think that adaptive reuse and figuring out other ways that we can add housing and range of housing types to our existing land use structure, whether that be through adaptive reuse. You know, Tricia Haggerty, I'm very excited to hear more about, you know, your experience with adaptive reuse. I think there are opportunities on some of our, you know, larger, older institutional buildings. The example, Renee, that you gave of the Sisters of St. Joseph's is an excellent example of a building that will accommodate an adaptive reuse of that historic structure and creating new apartments, and there'll be an addition onto it while preserving the sisters as part of the community there. So I think because we're largely developed, it's a bit more of a challenge for us, and we have to think more creatively about places that we can accommodate future growth.
We are coming up on two parcels that are significant. Obviously, one is the Yukon property, which has its own limitations in terms of buildability. But it certainly raises issues of reuse and mixed use. And the other is the town's plan to shut down, to relocate the Elmwood Community Center, which frees up a significant parcel of land in Elmwood. Now, these are The Elmwood part would only, unfortunately, would compound some of the issues of concentration. But then again, we have to look at those, we have to look at the places where we have those opportunities. We have not been historically really a community of mixed use. We have tended to, with the exception probably of West Hartford Center, and there are height limits still that make it hard to build up and add housing. So I think the idea of mixed use opportunities is going to be one that is important for a fully built community.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Todd. And just to elaborate a little bit on Todd's point about adaptive reuse or redevelopment opportunities, we are in communication right now with half a dozen to a dozen developers looking at potential projects, and just about all of them have some type of housing or multifamily, including multifamily opportunities in the mix. All right, so I saw another hand raised. I think it was Mark.
Hi, thanks. A couple things. I just wanted to expand on what Renee was saying, looking at the population that's aging in place. Thinking about, a lot of folks that may have come from means, but have just simply outlived their life savings, and thinking in terms of retirement or planning for the future. Not many plan to live to be 90, 95, or 100. And so, with the improvements of healthcare today and folks being more active and living longer, more affordable options are going to need to be presented out there for those folks. And then again, what do you do with that current housing stock? And then in terms of, I can think of just a few places in and around West Hartford that may pose good potential reuse or land reuse or building reuse. There's for the synagogue down the street and here, Bishop's Corner. I think of that place as an opportunity, maybe not a large opportunity, but just thinking sort of outside the box in terms of redevelopment.
Thank you, Mark. All right. Any other questions for Todd on that section of the Plan of Conservation and Development? Okay, thank you. I am mindful of the time. Want to touch on a couple of other things before our next meeting. So with respect to a meeting schedule and related details, the next item on our agenda, Gerida Reinheimer tomorrow can send a follow-up email with some suggested dates. We'll probably do a doodle poll again. Todd and I talked today about one meeting in July and another meeting in August, understanding it's vacation season, and that's an important thing for everybody, but we'll try to pick dates that work for the majority of us. Come September, depending on where we are, we may get to a point where we want to meet a couple of times a month. We may even break out into subgroups, because we're going to have 20 plus people here. So we may have a couple of subcommittees. We'll see as the conversation evolves. But for the remainder of the summer, we're going to recommend 2 more meetings, and we'll be in touch with you with some proposed meeting dates for that purpose. So what did I mean by the term related details on tonight's agenda? Just in terms of housekeeping, I suppose I could have started off with this, but again, this group, the advisory group, we are an ad hoc, task-focused committee that, once our work is done at some point in time, this advisory group will either go away or be replaced by a new entity. But even though we're ad hoc and we are project-focused, we still need to work and comply with what's called the Connecticut's Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. That's another acronym you will become familiar with. And those of you on the line who are familiar with the public sector here in Connecticut, you're probably very, very familiar with the law. But all you really need to know for purposes of this group is not a regulatory body. You know, this is an advisory group. This is a working group. There are just a couple of key things that you need to be aware of. And first is that our meetings must be open to the public. They must be open to the public, and that also means they need to be properly noticed and documented. So staff will assist with that and make sure that we comply with the statute. Todd and Brian Pudlick, who you haven't met yet, Brian is our assistant planner. They will be serving as the primary staff to the advisory group. I will be helping out, as well as Jerida. So we're going to be developing agendas. We'll make sure that they're posted on time. We will take minutes and share those too. So our meetings need to be open to the public. I imagine that next month we will probably start to meet again in person, if everybody's comfortable with that. So meetings are open to the public. That was one key point I wanted to hit. And then related to that, your deliberations, your conversations need to be held in public session and at an open meeting. All right, so our work needs to be done in an open session. So that means we should avoid discussing community business via email or text or even a chance meeting. Our committee business should be done as a group meeting together in open session. And believe it or not, if you're not familiar with the law, both email, including your private email accounts, email and text messages can constitute a public record if it relates to community business. So those are really the two main things that you need to be mindful of. Our meetings are open to the public. We're going to welcome the public to come in to listen. I think at some point in our work, we're probably going to want to poll the community, maybe even conduct focus groups with them. So our meetings are open to the public, and our deliberations need to be in public session. So those are the key things we really need to know about our Freedom of Information Act as it relates to our work. Can I take any quick questions on that?
Matt, so to the extent that any of us have
I'm sorry,
information.
Kevin, I wanted to recognize Tricia first, and then
Good.
Tricia Haggerty, then we'll get to you. Thank you.
Hi, are all our meetings, will they all continue via Zoom or will we meet in person?
Good question, Tricia. So I think it would be beneficial if we could try an in-person meeting. I'd like to do that for our next meeting. We will provide the option for people who might be away, but who still want to participate to do so virtually. And we have the option now to continue to hold what's called hybrid meetings. Our Corporation Counsel's office is still preparing some guidance for that in terms of how we need to conduct those meetings. But I do think it would be worthwhile to try an in-person meeting next time around. And again, giving an option for people to remote in as needed. Any follow-up on that, Tricia? All right. Kevin.
To the extent that any of us have requests for information then, which presumably would be, I don't know who is going to be the doorkeeper for this process. That's one question. If somebody wanted a bit of information, who would they email? And your point being that those emails and those responses need to be seen as in the public eye, and responses probably need to be shared with everybody, not just one of us.
Yes, exactly.
Fair.
Yeah. Let me elaborate on that, Kevin. So Drida will follow up with some emails over the next couple of days. Again, it will provide everybody's contact information, what you're comfortable with sharing. I'm going to ask her to prepare an email distribution list to share with the group overall. We will assign a primary staff person. It could be Brian. I don't know that definitively tonight, but we will make that decision soon. And yes, when one member requests information from staff, we're going to make sure to share it with the full group. All right. But when we send you some information, what I would ask you to avoid is getting into any sort of discussion or debate about what we send, because that could constitute an illegal meeting under FOIA. Of course, you can always ask about meeting details. All of that stuff is permissible. You can ask for information, but let's not discuss the information in that email format. Okay, any follow-ups there? Renee?
So when Kevin spoke earlier on about candid comments being shared, these, in view of the fact that these candid comments could be misconstrued by the general public, I would think that the candid aspect of this has ceased to exist. Comment?
Well, Renee, I think all public bodies deal with that to a certain extent, right? And again, our meetings are open to the public. We're going to encourage people to attend to the extent that they're interested in and available. And I would just really encourage us. We've got to be courageous as we take on this topic. There's a lot of important stuff to unpack here.
But we need to do so in a way that's more formal or less candid or free-spirited than we would in private conversation.
I think we can strike the right balance as we begin to work together as a group and get to know one another. Okay. Just a couple of quick items before we wrap up today. In terms of staff reports, I wanted to let you know, and this will be a future agenda item coming down the pike. I wanted to let you know that Todd and our Corporation Counsel's office and myself, a couple other staff people, we are working on a draft ordinance that would establish an inclusionary affordable housing requirement for future development projects. A very important piece of work that's going to relate to our discussions here. Todd, can you touch just very briefly on the purpose of the proposal?
Sure, Matt. So the purpose of that proposal would be to ensure that any future development growth in town includes a percentage requirement of deed restricted affordable units. So we talked about that, that 8% big A affordable number. If we don't have a mechanism, in this case through zoning, that would require a certain percentage be set aside that qualifies affordable units, that number will never grow. It'll probably come down as we add more units. So the idea is at least for future growth, we can ensure that we're meeting the minimum 10%. Whether it should be more than that, that's something that I think this group could certainly help us with. But I think we feel it's a necessary ordinance to bring to our council and have them consider, because we think there might be some development in the next few years that we feel it's important to have this in place. This mechanism is used by communities throughout the state and different tools and mechanisms. The community I came from prior to here, Stamford, has produced, well over 1,000, almost 2,000 units through this process. And it's permitted under state statute. And I think we think it's an important tool in our toolbox to promote affordable housing in the town as a whole, but it would apply to the future creation of new housing units. Okay, I saw Kevin and then I saw Bob. I'll take them in that order.
Since that's clearly a policy issue, I'm curious, is this at the direction of the policy body?
Yes, there is, not in terms of a formal vote, Kevin, but there is a strong interest on the part of council leadership in taking a look at a proposal. Thank you, Kevin. Bob, and then Gail.
And I know this is really early on the specifics, but are you thinking that it would be a set aside requirement or a payment in lieu of, i.e., if you're developing the housing, you either provide the units in your development or you pay into a fund whereby affordable housing units could be built elsewhere in town, not in that development?
Thank you, Bob. So that is one of the key issues we're going to want to discuss and get your feedback on. And I think the primary intent would be that inclusionary component, right? That projects of a certain size, whether it's 10 or more units, either a rental product or a for sale product, but depending on market conditions or project conditions, maybe we would want to allow a payment in lieu of option as well. But the primary goal would be that dedicated housing. Thanks, Bob. Gail, did you have your hand up? Gail, I think you're muted. You're still muted, Gail. All right, we'll keep going and we can. All right, any other questions related to that? Gail, you think you got it?
Okay. Yeah, my question was along the same lines. Would these developers be given tax benefits or tax incentives to go forward doing these developments?
Oh, that'll be part of the conversation as well. I think it's going to depend on the details in terms of what we might want to require and how aggressive we want to be as well. The town of West Hartford does not have a formal policy or an established practice of providing what are called tax abatements or tax fixing assessment agreements. We did perhaps our very first one for the One Park project that Renee had brought up earlier and Todd touched on. That's going to be roughly 300 unit multifamily project on Park Road at the Sisters of St. Joseph's property. And as part of that project, they are required to dedicate 10% of the units, 30 of the units as affordable housing, which we are defining as 80% of area median income. And I believe the deed restriction runs for 20 years. But we'll be talking about that as well, Gail.
Thanks, because in New York, that's how new affordable housing is created.
Right.
Yep. Understood. Okay. So those are all. I'm sorry, did I miss a hand? Somebody else have a hand up? Elizabeth Tavelli?
I haven't heard much about, I feel like I'm very much living this COVID world where the real estate market is like very crazy. And it seems to me that like West Hartford is already extremely desirable. And that we're pulling in people who maybe hadn't considered moving to like a less urban area, frankly. From coming in from like bigger cities and paying top dollar, waiving inspections and all that sort of fun stuff. And so I'm just curious if, are we going to see many numbers on how much the cost of housing has increased over the last year in Westford, like in the different neighborhoods, the existing housing stock.
Yeah, we will
and
try to.
like the demographics moving in, that makes sense.
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to talk on top of you, Elizabeth. Yes, we will, we'll pull together that data as well. We do have what's called a very hot housing market right now. I'm sure Nadia can speak to it much better than I can, but there's a lot going on. People are getting well over asking price. We're also in the middle of our statutorily required revaluation, which we need to do every 5 years. And we're mindful of market conditions and want to make sure that those factors aren't going to exercise too much influence in that process. Okay, can I take any final questions today? All right, well, thank you all. Number one, for volunteering for this very, very important work. Appreciate your time and attention tonight, your good questions, the good conversation, and we'll look forward to getting together in person sometime next month. Again, keep an eye out for some emails coming from us later on this week. I want to thank Todd very much for his assistance in preparing for tonight and helping out with tonight's meeting. And again, a big thanks to all of you. All right, happy
Thank
4th,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Happy 4th, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Happy 4th. Take care. Bye.